Welcome to the Joseph Campbell audio collection. This talk is called Hinduism. This is the third talk in the series entitled Eastern Way. And now, Joseph Campbell.
Well, last week we decided that I was going to talk about Hinduism this week, and then our next talk will be about Buddhism, and then the final talk will have to do with the Gnostic and related traditions in our Occident. These are all of a single constellation, actually. Now, what I want to try to do is make a very strong distinction between Hinduism and Buddhism, even though a great deal of the spiritual doctrine is so much the same that for many people it's difficult to distinguish between the two. Now, perhaps you'll remember 2 talks ago I spoke about the yoga, the Kundalini yoga. And I'm going to take it that with that I have presented the main themes of the Indian yoga system as it appears both in Hinduism and in Buddhism. What I want now to do is present what is peculiar to Hinduism as distinct from the Buddhist tradition, which I'm going to be talking about next week. Now, the first thing one must realize is that Hinduism is an ethnic religion. That is to say, one is born a Hindu. One can make a very valid analogy. Hinduism is related to Buddhism about as Judaism is to Christianity. That is to say, one is born a Hindu. Not only is one born a Hindu, one is born in a certain social stratum of the Indian tradition, Brahmin, a Kshatriya, a Vaishya, or a Shudra. And one is born a Jew. One becomes or confesses Buddhism. One confesses Christianity. Hinduism and Judaism are what I shall call ethnic religions. They are religions of a very ancient lineage. Buddhism and Christianity are creedal religions, credo. What you believe is the essential thing here. What you are by birth is the essential point in the ethnic religions. Creedal religions, there are 3 great creedal religions. These are world religions because anybody can profess them. Anybody can't be a Jew. Anybody can't be a Hindu. You have to be born thus. But anybody can become a Christian, a Buddhist, a Mohammedan. These 3 religions, therefore, have been dispersed. They occur in areas of totally different culture forms. For instance, Buddhism, we have it in Tibet, in China, in Korea, in Japan, but also in Ceylon, in Burma, Thailand, Vietnam, and it used to be also in Sumatra and Java. Christianity, you know the spread of Christianity on both sides of the World War. Creedal religions are usually, well, these 3, initiated by a single prophet, a single teacher, who, as it were, extracts the spiritual quintessence of the ethnic religion from which he derives. The life of the teacher becomes then a symbol of the doctrines. And this is a point I'm going to try to make next week. So in talking about Buddhism in our next talk, I'm going to be presenting some views with respect to creedal religions. Now, in talking about Hinduism tonight, I want to use Hinduism as an example of an ethnic religion. Now, in a religion of this kind, there's very, very great stress placed upon ritual law. There is very often little distinction made between ritual virtue and what we, having inherited our notion of ethics from the Greeks, would call ethics. For instance, one reads in the Bible of a man who was found picking up sticks on Saturday, on the Sabbath. And Moses asked God what should be done about this man. And the answer was he should be stoned to death. He was breaking a ritual law. Similarly, in Hinduism, most of the laws and doctrines that I'm going to talk about are ritual laws of this kind. They have nothing to do with a general concept of human ethics, virtue in the sense of an abstract or psychological matter. These are laws that are made specifically to keep a certain group of people together and to differentiate them from other people. Now, in Judaism, you have the Jewish community set apart as a priestly race, the holy race. That's the real function of the kosher laws and all this. You can't eat your food in anyone else's house. One must be together. Similarly, in Hinduism, and these two religions come from almost exactly the same period of time. In Hinduism, there are special rules for every single social order, because here you have not simply one religious group, you have a whole society structure. You have the priestly, you have the governing caste, you have the merchant caste, and you have the servant caste. So I'm going to be talking about these separations. In India, and this is true to this day, people are to such an extent separated from each other that everybody is untouchable to everybody else. Now, when you have a society like this, in traditional Hinduism, I remember the amazement of my life when I met a splendid young Brahmin youth when I was a young man myself. And he was over here and preaching and teaching and so forth. You would know his name, but I won't tell you who he was. He was a Brahmin family. He told me when he went back to India, he could not eat with his father because he had crossed the water. He had left India. He had eaten with mlechas. That's to say, well, in Judaism, goyim, people who are not of the holy society. He had eaten with them. Therefore, he couldn't eat with his father. This is a very important point to remember about the great old traditional religions, out of which these later creedal religions have developed. The first point then in Hinduism, in traditional Hinduism, what's happening now is something extremely complicated, and one can only feel, well, anxiety for the problem of the Indian psyche. In traditional Hinduism, each caste has its own laws, its own morality, its own place in the society. And the individual is given so many laws to attend to that his whole life is spent doing what he ought to do. And he never has a moment to think, what would I like to do? The function of these laws is to bind the individual to the group, absolutely, so that he is not what we would call an individual. In Sanskrit, there is no word that means individual. In Indian art, that's to say traditional Indian art, individuals are not represented. What are represented are typical Brahmins, typical princes, typical merchants. And the individual dresses in such a way that when you meet him, you know what his caste is. Furthermore, his name tells you what his caste is. People's names are given them according to their social status. The dress that he wears, the name that he bears, and even his physical character, because people have married only within the caste. Consequently, these are, as it were, races. It's a very important point. Even a person who goes to India for the first time, you're there, let's say, for a couple of weeks, and if you've had the good fortune to get outside of the Cook's Tour area and meet people of different social orders or see them, you'll know that's a Brahmin. You can tell when you see him. That's a merchant. Now, the first point to talk about then, in talking about traditional Hinduism, and what I'm going to try to give you is a sense of the impersonality of this culture, and how the goal of all this is to make the individual forget that he's an individual, to make him lose the sense of himself as a freely willing, freely judging, special being. The highest caste is called a Brahmin, B-R-A-H-M-A-N, and that first A is a long A. Now that long A means related to, having to do with Brahman, with a short A. Brahman is the Indian name for that divine power, that divine energy and it is always thought of as divine, which is the source and being of the universe. The whole universe is a manifestation of energy, as we now know from our atom explosions. We are such energy. We're made up of atoms. Therefore, properly mistreated, we would explode. We are that energy. That's what we are. That is Brahman. The Brahmins are those who know how, through their rituals, to direct that energy into the channels of the society so that it animates and fosters and forwards the aims of the social group. Now, they do this by means of their rites, their rituals. And these rituals consist primarily of two aspects. One is the action. There is an act to perform. And the other is the hymn, or the voice, or the word that is pronounced in relation to the action. These hymns, these words, these magical power syllables come from a body of literature known as the Vedas, V-E-D-A. That word Veda comes from a Sanskrit root vid, V-I-D, which means knowledge. Vidya means knowledge, vid, to know. These Vedas represent the knowledge of the divine order of the universe. And the Vedas, the books in which these hymns and their musical intonations appear, these books are regarded as revealed. This is a revelation. The Sanskrit word is shruti, heard. These hymns were not invented, according to doctrine. These hymns were first heard by the ancient seers, the ancient hearers. They come as manifestations not of the revelation of a divine being, but the revelation of the universe itself, the order of the universe. Now, as I've already said, I think, the divine beings in the Orient are personifications of the power of the universe. But the universe is there from beginning to end, and there was no beginning and there will be no end. It was not created. It is in being. It is in process. And the laws of this process, the perfectly impersonal, mechanical laws, become revealed through the Vedas. Now, these Vedas represent divine revealed truth. And the truth includes not only the hymns that are sung to invoke the powers, but also the actions that are performed. These ritual actions are a precious heritage that has come. Every movement, every intonation of the voice is communicated exactly to the next generation, so that it has come down like an unmodified heritage. The individuals, the teacher's function is not to criticize, not to judge, not to interpret, but to render without modification what he received from his teacher, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. The teacher is therefore to become, as it were, a completely transparent glass. He isn't there. This not being there is the ultimate aim of Indian spirituality. Now, the Brahmin, therefore, is the topmost caste. There was a very interesting moment in Indian religious development, which takes place around 800 BC, when the implications of the Vedas began to be discussed in theological discourse. And this was the point of view. Since through our rites we can control the gods, our rights are stronger than the gods. Since the Brahmins know how to manipulate these rights, the Brahmins are stronger than the gods. The Brahmins are the strongest beings in the universe. This remains the Indian concept to this day. Let's say the traditional Indian complex. And if you don't believe that traditional India is still operative, think of the riots last week, anti-cow slaughter campaigns. We have no idea what's going to happen in India. There is a ground base of traditionalism and conservatism and antiquity there that is absolutely immeasurable. The second caste now is called the Kshatriya. You can spell this K-S-H-A-T, Kshat, R-I-Y-A, Kshatriya. Kshat comes from a root meaning to protect, to defend. The Kshatriya are the governing caste, the kings, the princes. The word has been translated frequently warrior caste, but we would not call Queen Elizabeth a member of the warrior caste. These are the aristocrats, the nobility. Their function is to govern the people, and here's a very important point, in terms of the law revealed by the Brahmins. Now again, one can make a comparison with the Bible, or with the traditional Hebrew tradition. The laws of Leviticus and Deuteronomy and so forth are not regarded as invented by man. They are revealed of God. Similarly, in India, the laws by which the Kshatriya, or aristocrats, govern are regarded as revealed. Man has no choice in this matter. It's from the Greeks that we get the idea that the human intelligence is competent to determine prudent, noble, appropriate aims for human life, and to contrive laws by which those aims may be achieved. This is not the traditional view. This is not the traditional view either in the Bible or in the Hindu tradition. The traditional view is that the law comes from the universe, or from the creator of the universe in the biblical tradition, and is imposed upon man, and it's man's function to adjust himself to that law, to live by it, not to criticize it, not to ask, but this is insane. Why should a human being do this? Do it. Kill the man who picked up sticks on Saturday. This is the way the traditional laws operate in India. So that the function of the Kshatriya, or the warrior, or the nobleman, is to administer the laws, to see that they are obeyed, which the Brahmin knows through his study of the revelation. The revelation, the Brahmin who knows it, the warrior or prince who administers it and sees to it that the law is obeyed. The notion of law as a convention does not exist. Coming up here in my car, when the red light came on, I stopped. When the green light went on, I got going again. If I had crossed the red light, I would have had my eyes open for a policeman, not for God Almighty. That is to say, I wasn't offending the laws either of God or of the universe, but of the local conventions. This is our idea of law. You violate humanity, or you violate the local convention, but not the universe. This is a quite different psychology. And we must bear this in mind when we're thinking of the traditional man. Now, the third caste is known as the Vaishya, V-A-I-S-H-Y-A, Vaishya. That comes from a root vish, V-I-S-H, which means settled, to settle. This is the third estate, the caste of money, the caste of property ownership, what we would call the substantial body of the community. These people are the merchants, the landowners, the bankers, and so forth and so on. Their function is to raise their family in decency and prosperity to make money. This is the money caste. The Brahmin lives for truth, or what he conceives to be truth, namely the truth of the Vedas. The Kshatriya lives for justice and authority, impersonally administering. The merchant lives for prosperity and the abundance of life, and he pays his taxes and pays his tithes. These three castes are called the twice-born. These three castes are called the Aryan castes. Now, Aryan is a Sanskrit word, and it means noble. These are the castes for whom the Hindu tradition is designed. Separate from them, quite apart, different race, different species, different character altogether, are the so-called Shudra, S-H-U-D-R-A. This is from a root that means to suffer. These are the artisans, the peasants, the workers, and the what we call outcasts. They are not assimilated into the Aryan tradition. They are regarded as totally other. They are of two orders. One, those from whom a Brahmin may accept water. The other, those from whom a Brahmin may not accept water. Why may the Brahmin not accept water? Because he would become contaminated. These people, the Shudras, are regarded not only as socially, but also as spiritually low. It is as though they were diseased. And to touch the unclean Shudra, that's to say those from whom one cannot take water, is to contaminate yourself with a spiritual infection. The ruthless avoidance of these people, from our standpoint, the horror of their lives, is a function of the belief that they are infectious, like lepers, spiritual lepers. In the Indian law books, the so-called laws of Manu, M-A-N-U, Manu is, the word is related to our word man, also mentality. Manu is the sort of primordial man image of India. The laws of Manu say, in one passage, which I remember reading with amazement, if a Shudra hears the recitation of the Vedas, overhears the recitation of the Vedas, even by accident, he shall have boiling lead poured into his ears. This kills him. The Vedas are power. They are like atom secrets. They are the powers by which the Brahmins direct the energies of the universe, and this power must not be leaked to the subject people. The unclean Shudra, before the English rule, coming into a village compound, if he were dying of thirst, couldn't touch the water there. Nobody could give it to him either, because how could you get it to him? He would have to wear a spittoon so that his saliva wouldn't fall on the earth and contaminate it. This is fierce. Now, this seems to us inequitable, to say the least. Not to the Indian. Why not? Fundamental to all Indian social thinking is the concept of reincarnation. Fundamental to this is the notion that through many, many lives, we go, as it were, through a school, the school of the universe, the school of the world, the school of rebirths. I think of these four castes, Shudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya, and Brahman, as the freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior classes. At the top of the school system, below that, we have people who had the misfortune not even to be born in India, like ourselves. Still further down, animals, although the animals born in India are more fortunate than ourselves. Below that, the vegetable world and the physical world. These objects before me here are souls on the way up. I think of a pop bottle. When you take the top off, the bubbles come up. Where do they come from? Where do they go? Who knows? The void. But there they are coming up through the vegetables, so on, so on, so on, so on, so on. The whole world is an educational institution. And every creature in it is trying to learn a lesson. And now, what is the lesson that is to be learned? The lesson to be learned is egolessness. To cancel the noise I, as they say in Sanskrit, ahankara, making the noise I and mine. This is my body. These are my thoughts. These are my words. Get rid of that. Don't be there. So you can see now, the kicking around that the Shudra gets is his lesson. He's losing the sense of I. He is learning how to accord with the law of the universe in terms of his range of understanding. Now, between our college years, there come the holidays, those lovely times of summer. And if the student has lived a good year, that student will go on a holiday somewhere. Similarly, if a person has lived a good life, has learned the lesson of that life, he will go on a holiday somewhere. Where? One of the heavens. A heaven in accord with his capacity. Now, if his desire is sensual or sexual delight, he will go to a heaven of that kind. If his desire is the contemplation of high thoughts, he will go to a heaven of that kind. If his possibility is to go beyond thought, he will go to a heaven of that kind. But if he has lived a bad year, he will go to a summer school. And there, real tough, thuggish professors will be banging it into him with clubs. That's hell. Now, the heavens and hells are inhabited by human beings between lives. And these human beings are what men call gods and demons. That is to say, there is no ontological, no essential difference whatsoever between gods and men. Gods are simply men and women between lives in the heavens, enjoying the fruits of a good life lived. And when the reward bank is used up, back you come for another life. It's in human life that the fulfillment is to be achieved, not in heaven. And the goal of life, what's the goal of school? To graduate, to get out of this school, never to come back, to be absolutely nobody at all, to have learned the lesson perfectly, to have erased yourself. This is a hard thing for us in the West to realize. When Dante went to hell, to purgatory, to heaven, he recognized everybody he saw. The personality, the individuality, that intelligible character, that thing that is you, in our view, endures. That is the final term, to find yourself as a self, different from other selves. When Odysseus, when Ulysses went to the inferno of the Greek world, he recognized the people there. There were individuals there. Now, if you were to go to a Hindu, heaven or hell, or a Buddhist, heaven or hell, or a Jain Buddhist, heaven or hell, you'd see lots of people there. You wouldn't recognize any of them. They don't even remember their earlier lives, the lives that got them there. They are gods, living as gods, thinking of themselves as gods, just as we are human beings, living as human beings, thinking of ourselves as human beings. Whereas only a few years ago, we too were gods in a heaven, the heaven between the last life and this one. You don't remember that. And when you get to the heaven next time, God with you, you won't remember this life at all. You won't know why you're there. You'll think, oh, I'm a god. Absolute impersonality. You are playing a role. There is no individual whatsoever. And the main point is to get that idea. Now, by obeying the rules, you don't have the opportunity to develop as an individual. Now, this is a point that I think is terribly important. Now let's just think of this psychologically for a moment. What is the function of ego? I. There are two aspects. One is I want. That's the simple childlike ego. And this is countered in the nursery by thou shalt. The child wants, but mama and daddy know better. Thou shalt. In a traditional culture, the goal is to go from I want to thou shalt, to represent the local thou shalt system. That's not our ideal. Our ideal is that the little growing individual should develop his own judgment, that he should become a self-responsible, judging individual, and control his own I want by his own matured judgments as to what is proper for himself, for his friends, for his country, for his world. That is to say, we ask the individual to develop a creative, critical, self-responsible personality. Billy, do you want ice cream or cake? Do you want chocolate or vanilla? Make up your mind. Johnny, do you want to marry Susan or Betty? Make up your mind. Not so in the Orient. chocolate ice cream. Betty, and you never saw her before. There is absolutely no development of the critical personality. The ideal is that there's nobody there, but that the tradition is coming through without alteration. Now, this living of your duty is called dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A. That is the key word of Hinduism. And this word means duty. It is from a Sanskrit root, dhr, D-H-R-I. Dri is the way it's usually written. That word means to support. Your duty, and by performing your duty, you support the universe. The universe is alive. The sun performs its duty. The moon performs its duty. The mice perform their duty. The cats perform theirs. The Brahmins perform theirs. The Shudras perform theirs. And by this, everyone performing his duty, the universe is held in form. And by performing your duty, you hold the universe in form. The word for truth is satya, S-A-T-Y-A. Perhaps you remember Gandhi's satyagraha. Graha means gripping, holding to truth. That word satya comes from a Sanskrit root sat, S-A-T, which means to be. A person who performs his duty is something. Sat, he is. The feminine participle of sat is sati, the wife who burns herself to death on her husband's funeral pyre. The wife who burns herself to death on her husband's funeral pyre is a wife. The Indians don't say commits sati. The Indians say becomes sati, becomes something. The person who does not perform his duty is asat, nothing. You achieve your character by doing as you're told, not by deciding what you want to do or what you think would be proper to do. Now, I think it can be said that all of Indian life is an act of sati. Now, I have two little stories to tell. The Indian anecdotes are very vivid, memorable, and they give the point in a very strong way. This first story has to do with sat, with performing your duty. It is thought in a sort of popular way that a person who has performed his duty perfectly throughout his life can perform magic simply by saying, if I have done so and so all my life without fail, really, truly, then let such and such take place, and it will take place. This is called an act of truth. So this story is of a time in the 3rd century BC when the Ganges was rising and threatening to flood the capital city of Pataliputra, which is now called Patna. And the king went down to the bank of the river to watch this. All the people were there. You know, the river's coming up. What's going to happen? And as it approached the level of great danger, the king said, is there nobody here who can perform an act of truth and cause the waters of the Ganges to flow back upstream? The Brahmins, the priests, none of them could perform an act of truth. They were Brahmins because they had lived lives perfectly in earlier incarnations, but in this one, not one of them was perfect. The Kshatriyas, the king himself, not one. The Vaishyas, not one. Way down the line was an old prostitute, and her name was Bindumati. And she began muttering around, saying, I have an act of truth. Well, her neighbor said, Bindi, get going, for heaven's sakes. So Bindumati draws herself inward and in her own soul pronounces the act of truth that she has. And, of course, what do you know? The river does indeed begin to flow back upstream. Well, everybody's enormously excited, and who performed the act of truth? And the word comes rippling up to the king, Bindumati. What an amazement. Because it's a funny thing about doctrines of religion. One knows what they are, but one never thinks they really work. And so the king goes down the way, and there's Bindumati, and he calls her a string of names, you old thing. You mean to say you have an act of truth? I have an act of truth that would turn the world of the gods upside down if I wanted it to. Somewhat intimidated, the emperor says, what is your act of truth? It is as follows. If in the performance of my duty she is born in this low caste, if in the performance of my duty I have not fawned upon the wealthy, the handsome, or those of high caste, nor despised the poor, the low caste, and the ugly, but have always given due service for the money, let the waters flow back upstream. There was nobody there. She was gold. She had no judgment. She was doing her duty, and that's the way India is supposed to work. Now, did the king say, Bindumati, you've saved the city. Come, we'll put a monument up, sit on the throne. Nothing of the kind. Not that lifetime. Next lifetime, perhaps Queen of Benares, but not now. That is her function. Mice cannot become lionesses. This is something to remember with respect to the caste system, and it's something that comes through in India. By performing their duty, no matter where, the individual participates in the glory and power of the universe and becomes a conduit of that power. Nobody chooses to do anything. Everybody's doing what he ought. And so this grand thing, which is the universe, rides on. And one goes to India, and one sees the horror of it. And my God, it is appalling what one sees. It's the words for poverty and squalor that we use don't touch what you see there. And yet, when you're there and the shock has finally been absorbed, there comes this realization. Peace, peace, radiance. I remember reading years ago in an article, I don't even remember where it was, by Lewis Mumford, a sentence. Values emerge from life on all its levels. But they won't emerge if you're criticizing it. They will emerge only if you go with it. This is the traditional point of view. You come in on this level, live it. Perform the duty. I'm speaking now in Indian terms. Don't say, oh, gee, I ought to be up there. I ought to be down here. Somebody's cheating me. This guy's getting more than I am. Live it. You judge your life not in terms of what the other fellow's getting, but in terms of whether you're really doing it. This is the glory of India. It was the thing that made it great once. It's the thing that's supporting it in its horror now. So much then for the idea of sat, being something. You are something insofar as you're a social being by doing your job. And they do it. They do it well. There's another story. This one's a more gentle story. This is of a teacher. Now, in India, the word teacher is guru. And this means something very different from what teacher means for us. Teacher for us, generally, nowadays at any rate, means somebody who communicates information to you and gives you certain guidance in your life and crises and so forth. Teacher in India, or guru, means a person who himself is your model. The student is meant to identify with the teacher, to become as the teacher. The teacher became as his teacher, and so there's nobody there. There is the image of teacher coming on down the line. Now, this story is of a student who arrived one day late. The teacher says, "You're late. Where have you been? What's the matter here?" Well, the student says, "I couldn't get here. I live the other side of the stream and of the river. The river was in flood. There was no ferry. The fording place was too deep. I couldn't get here." Was it the teacher? Did the ferry come? Did the river go down? No. Well, how did you get here? Was it the student? I thought of my teacher. And I thought, my teacher is the vehicle of truth to me. He is my God. He is my oracle. I will think about my teacher, and I'll walk across the water. And so I did. I thought, guru, 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 and I'm here. Well, thought the teacher, I didn't know I'd made it. Well, the teacher hadn't made it. When the student goes, the teacher thinks, this was in him. He says, I've got to try this thing. I've got to see how this works. So he looks around, sees anybody's watching, and he goes down to the water, and he thinks, I'm going to do it. I. He sang. The only reason one can walk across water is there's nobody there. One is pure spirit, spiritus, wind. That teacher, in the student's mind, was a communicator of truth. In his own mind, he was an I, and an I has weight and sinks. So much then for caste. This is the main idea. Now we come to one more theme, which is very important. Well, now called the ashramas, A-S-H-R-A-M-A, ashrama. That means disciplines. The disciplines proper to the different stages of life. Life is divided in the middle. This is a wonderful concept, but it's one that I don't recommend. Life is divided in the middle. When the first gray hairs arrive, that's about the middle. And the Indians regard the middle as very early. The first half of life, in the traditional view, is to be lived in the village, in the society, performing your social dharma. The second half of life is to be lived in the forest, performing yoga to achieve absolute illumination. This is the way in which India has synthesized the two diametrically opposed orders of social commitment and social dissociation in order to achieve inwardness and absolute transcendence. For India, social life and all this that I've been talking about is simply a preparation. You are diminishing the force of ego. In the forest, you must erase it absolutely, or you must try. Now, each half of life is itself divided in half. The first part to be spent learning, the second part in realization. First quarter of life, therefore, is that of student, first 15 years or so. The second quarter of life is that of householder, as it's called. One is married, never saw the wife or husband before. The family and marriage brokers have provided a perfectly proper person according to your caste. You can read in Indian newspapers today columns advertising for wives. All this is done by families and brokers. The little boy or girl knows nothing about it. And when the marriage, the crisis comes when the veil is removed and each sees other, and that's it, particularly for the wife who probably will have to throw herself on this, whatever it is funeral pyre some fine day. Then comes the time of departure. Now one is expected, as if a man, to go into the forest at midlife. The first duty of the householder is to beget children. This is the duty to the ancestors. In honor and in gratitude for the life that one has received, one passes it on. And then, very early, in their 30s, the father will have, if he starts his work early enough, a son ready to take over the duties of the household. And these households are great patriarchal households. A beautiful ritual where the father communicates his dharma to his oldest son. All of the rites, the marriage rites, the rites of the first night and so forth are beautiful. The individual is identified with cosmic forces and so forth. And impersonal though it is, it achieves a kind of religious glory. The father communicates his dharma to his son, and with the advice of his guru or his brahmin, goes into the forest. And now we're in the second half of life, the third stage. He goes to a guru in the forest. This is called the period of entering the forest, vanaprastha. Who will teach him? Yoga, or at least will estimate his capacities and give him religious exercises appropriate to his spiritual development. Maybe just giving him a copy of the Bhagavad Gita and telling him to read that, Or it may be dig a hole in the ground, put yourself in it, leave your nose out, and stay there for a couple of months. All the way from just the mildest religious exercise to the most severe. What is the goal of this yoga? Well, when Western people become sentimental about the Orient, they have lots of nice thoughts about yoga. But the fierceness and ruthlessness of this is something that would curl your hair. You lived your life performing your duties. No ego, no ego, no ego. But there were certain things you did like, certain things you didn't like, certain memories you cherish, certain memories that give you pain. There are certain tastes you like. There are certain things you don't like. In the ultimate yoga, you are to erase all those experiences so that you can't tell the difference between a pain and a pleasure, so that you can't tell the difference between a foul stench and a glorious perfume, so that you can't tell the difference, as they say, between gold and mud. You must kill even the energy of your cells to cling to life. You must shatter the life in yourself so there's nothing there. That's the goal of this yoga. That's why these fantastic austerities. Now, in some of the Indian systems, some of the Hindu systems, this is understood in an extremely physical way, that you really are killing the body in you, killing the will to life, killing the fear of death, killing everything in you. In Buddhism, which I'm going to be talking about next week, the aim is to kill this psychologically, not really to kill yourself off, but to become, as it were, a stick. One great Indian teacher, Shankaracharya, says, the illuminated man is like a burnt string. The burnt string looks like a string, but blow, and it isn't there. The illuminated man looks like a man, but there's nobody there. There's absolute egolessness. When in your yoga, you have achieved that realization, which is called release, moksha, which is called nirvana, where winds do not blow. You remember the first verse of the Old Testament, the wind of God blows or broods over the waters. That starts the ripple of the waters of life. Stop that wind. There's no creation. There's nothing. When that has been achieved, the individual is nobody. He is literally nobody. He now need not practice yoga because he has achieved the aim of yoga. He is a burnt string, but his body is still in momentum. It's still there. He becomes what is called a bhikshu, a wandering monk or a wandering saint. India has these men, a lot of fakers, but it has the real thing too. These are of two types. Those that wear a garment that suggests a burial shroud, and those that are absolutely naked. Since clothing in India indicates your caste and also indicates a social reference, nakedness indicates beyond caste, absolute indifference to the world and not being in it. These people are called clothed by space, Digambara. Now, after you've finished your dinner, what do you do with the garbage? Or there's no refrigerators in the old days. Look at the door. There will be a yogi or two with their hands, if they're naked, or a bowl if they're wearing a shroud. And you give them the garbage. That's all they ask for. These men have lived their duty. They have done it. Now they're wandering dead leaves. Ask them questions, religious questions. Some of them will be not speaking. Others will teach. Now here's an important point. They teach from experience. They have experienced the ultimate aim of Indian religious life. Clergymen, and the Brahmins in India are the clergymen, they teach from having read the right books. That's a different thing. These people teach from the source from which the books came. These constitute in India an actual living refreshment of the archaic tradition. They are experiencing today, and I've met them and I've talked with them, they are experiencing today the truth that was the experience that was the source of the Vedas. And this is experienced as valid. Nobody can refute it. Nobody can tell me there's no such thing as an elephant if I've seen an elephant. Nobody can tell me there's no such thing as release if I have experienced release. These men know, and they constitute a traditional, conservative, terrific power in India. Now, this is what we are in touch with today when we're in touch with India. You can think of a pyramid. You can think of the very top of the pyramid as constituting a highly developed native Indian population. You can think of the bottom of the pyramid as constituting the great mass of India. And you can think of a little band up toward the top, let's call it a black band, around the pyramid, like a collar. That is the English-educated, newspaper-reading, newspaper-writing group, UN and so forth, that we think represents India. They do represent India in a certain sense in the field of international politics, but they are going to be as surprised as you and I are when the great mass gets going again, and it is getting going. I think that India just cannot be calculated. This is the point I wanted to make now. A whole society of non-entities, people performing duties in terms of, well, the oldest living tradition in the world. Hinduism goes back to about the middle of the second or millennium BC, about 2000 BC. Has been refreshed when the Aryans came in and so forth, but the main line of Hinduism goes back to the old Dravidian times, about 2000 BC. The deities that are worshipped, Shiva and the goddess, these are the great divinities, are as archaic as any divinities being worshipped in the world today. And they are there, and they are alive. And they live in the people's minds.
You have been listening to Hinduism, the third talk by Joseph Campbell in the series entitled Eastern Way.